In the Mongolian language, the word Khara means dark, and the word Hoto means a castle. The dark castle of Khara Hoto once lay on the Silk Road, but it was destroyed by the terrible Genghis Khan, and then it disappeared together with all the inhabitants of the region. The people were called Tangut, and the kingdom where they lived was called Xie. When the destruction was over, the castle of Khara Hoto, which had been the fortress of the Tangut people, was buried under the sands of the Gobi Desert. The masters of the castle and the secrets of their script disappeared from the face of the earth. Our journey to Khara Hoto started at Jiuchang, an oasis on the Silk Road near the Qilian Mountains. The dark castle is in the middle of the desert, about 400 kilometers or 250 miles north from this bell tower at Jiuchang. The Chinese-Japanese expedition set out for the north at the beginning of April. In Mongolian, the word Gobi means a stony wilderness. The Silk Road is mostly through wilderness, but the part between the Qilian Mountains and the Mongolian Plateau is the longest stretch of actual desert. The first person to look for Khara Hoto in this wilderness was the Russian Koslov at the beginning of the 20th century. He had heard stories about a lost city in the middle of the desert, and he believed there might be something in them. Other explorers to search for Khara Hoto included Hedin, a Swede, Stein, an Englishman, and Warner, an American art historian. But 50 years have passed since the last of these set foot here. There were archaeologists both from China and from Japan with us. The archaeologists noticed earthworks we were passing that were the ruins of signal towers built in Han times, about 2,000 years ago. The Agena River fed by melting snow from the Qilian Mountains. About 2,000 years ago, the road by this river connecting Jiuchang and Khara Hoto was the scene of many battles between the wild nomadic Huns and Chinese soldiers who kept the Silk Road safe for travelers. Along the river, the Chinese built a series of forts and a line of defense extending northwards. Khara Hoto was the most northerly point of this line of defense. These statues of mounted soldiers and horse-drawn chariots were excavated near Jiuchang, and they represent members of the Chinese army. The frontier soldiers in those days were a mixed lot. Conscripts, settlers recruited from the interior of China, and even convicts all helped to guard this distant frontier. "250 kilometers, or 150 miles from Jiuchang, we pitched camp for the first time. The temperature during the day had been about 20 degrees Celsius, or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. But during the night, it quickly fell to as low as about -6 degrees Celsius, or about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. This wide range of diurnal temperature is quite common in the Gobi Desert. We found the dried hoof of a camel, which showed no sign of decomposition. Perhaps the camel had been killed by wolves. We couldn't guess. In this area, the only rainfall is only about 37 millimeters, or 1.5 inches, and evaporation would easily dry out 100 times this amount. The Japanese archaeologist remarked that he would have liked to be able to explore this area on foot if there'd been time. What discoveries must be waiting in the desert to help solve some of the mysteries of history? A Buddhist picture excavated at Harahoto by Kozlov at the beginning of the century is now in the Hermitage Museum in the Soviet Union. In contrast with most Buddhist art, this picture is decidedly disturbing. The Tangut people who founded the kingdom of Xie and who painted this picture may have been of Tibetan origin. Tibetan culture has connections both with the West and with the East, but it is quite distinctive. The people of Tangut had a script of their own based on Chinese characters and were Buddhists. They conquered the treasure house city of Dunhuang and established a great kingdom in the middle of the desert. On the second day, about noon, we came to a strange place strewn with sharp black stones. Even by the standards of the Gobi Desert, this is a fearful place, and the local people dread it. In the middle of the desert, Xie prospered as a way station for east-west trade. However, this prosperity only lasted for about 200 years. In the 13th century, the city seems to have vanished. And we have no idea what happened to the Tangut who ruled it, or of its inhabitants, or their descendants. About 350 kilometers, or 200 miles from Jiujiang, we came to the first oasis on our journey, the town of Egina. In Marco Polo's book of his travels, there's a mention of an Egina, but it wasn't this town, which was built only around 1960. But because of the oasis, the name still remains. There's a garrison of the Chinese army stationed here to patrol the border. It's quite near the Mongolian border, and today, as in the past, it's China's main northerly line of defense. We heard a rumor that in the Gobi Desert to the south of the town, there was a launching base for missiles and satellites. At midday, the oasis is busy with people going home for lunch. We were a great attraction. There are very few foreigners to be seen here. Many people tried to persuade us not to go on. They knew all about Harohoto and wouldn't dream of going there. They said there was no water, the terrible things that happened there in the past, and might well happen again. They thought we were fools for wanting to go to such a place. Harohoto lies east of Egina, near a place where the Egina River becomes a group of small lakes. One of these small lakes, Tiene, provides water and grazing for the Mongolians' camels. Here, even the smallest child is a skillful camel rider. This herd of 500 camels is being looked after by a group of 3 families. For people who live in the Gobi Desert, camels are quite indispensable. According to the Han histories, there was once a big lake here, like an inland sea. Today, the Great Lake has broken up into a number of smaller ones. The Chinese scientists believe this is due to movements of the sand over 2,000 years. At the edge of the lake, we came across a community tent belonging to people from the Tolgut tribe. The Tolgut are Mongolians who wandered here about 300 years ago from Xinjiang, far away in the west, and settled down. They raise goats, sheep and camels, and every 6 months they wander off in search of new pastures. When they find a good place, they rebuild their tents and settle down again. But they stay within an area about 500 kilometers across or 300 miles. This family looks after a flock of about 400 sheep and goats, but of these only about 40 actually belong to them. The others are communal property. The more stock they look after, the more they get paid. They make a kind of alcoholic drink from mare's milk called kumis. First, the milk is allowed to ferment, and then it's heated on a stove. Then a round wooden cylinder, hollow and open at both ends, is placed in the milk. And a small pot is suspended inside the wooden cylinder. A second bowl is placed on top of the cylinder and filled with cold water. The alcohol in the mare's milk condenses on the cold water bowl and trickles down into the small pot. It's a form of still. We met one Tolgud tribesman who had been near Hara Hoto several times in the course of his wanderings. He was 71 years old, and his name was Tamdon. He agreed to act as our guide as long as he didn't actually have to enter the castle, but only approach it. They serve the kumis in silver cups. It tastes pretty rank, but we didn't want to hurt the old man's feelings. We found out afterwards that if you don't down it at a single gulp, they always refill the cup. At the village of Nanborg, we borrowed 33 camels. We had our equipment, water, food and so on, more than a ton of luggage altogether. In addition to Tamdon, 5 more Mongols joined us. They would also be guides and would look after the camels. It was about 50 kilometers or 30 miles to Hara Hoto. And since camels usually travel at about 35 kilometers a day or 20 miles, it'd take us about a day and a half to get there. You can get a good view from a camel, and it's quite broad to sit on. So our first experience of travel by camel seemed quite satisfactory at first. Tamdon told us there was a tall stupa or pagoda at Hara Hoto which ought to be visible from a distance. This would provide us with a landmark to aim at. Each camel carries about 150 kilograms of luggage. That's 300 pounds. 2 or 3 of them were laden separately with our equipment and material to make a yurt, a tent. Before us on this road had traveled the merchants of the Silk Road with their precious stones and fine stuffs. And more recently, Kozlov, Stein and Hardin, world-famous explorers. We soon had to stop. We found that 2 hours on a camel was about as much as we could take. The tents are like prefab houses. The basic structure is made of the wood of the tamarisk, a sort of willow that grows in the desert. You join the side sections, make an arch roof covered with felt pieces, and that's it. 4 or 5 people can put one up in less than 40 minutes. The camels eat anything, even the scrubby bush that grows in the desert. And there are records of camels going for as long as 72 days without water. Even in early April, the ground temperature in the Gobi Desert is well over 40 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The hot air seems to shimmer, and you can see mirages everywhere. Yet when the wind blows, the air is so dry it feels cool against your skin. Between the dunes, you lose sight of what's ahead, and can only tell you direction from the position of the sun and the shape of the dunes. Here, because the wind blows from the northwest, the dunes slope southeast. The dunes continue uninterruptedly. This sort of terrain is very exhausting for camels, and in order not to strain them too much, Tumdon, the caravan master, kept their speed down to about 3 kilometers an hour, or 2 miles. They drink an odd beverage here called oily tea. It's made by adding hot water, not to tea leaves, but to a mixture of flour and mutton fat. It isn't to everybody's taste, but it certainly kept us warm. We checked our position. Since we knew that Hara Hoto was at 41 degrees 45 minutes north and 101 degrees 5 minutes east, we could easily work out that there were only about another 10 kilometers to go.
35度33分のこれは0.4
As we progressed, we kept our eyes open for the Stupa landmark. At 20 past 6 on the 6th of April, we sighted Hara Hoto for the first time. The silhouette of the stupa showed clearly against the darkening sky. The old man told us, don't go near the castle at night, or a curse will fall on you. He sat playing a folk instrument, and he started to tell us the story of Hara Hoto as it's been handed down from ancient times.
тариалантай эндээс аваад ингээс их эцнээ их өргөн тариалантай ийм нэг баян чарахгүй байж гинэ. Энэ бол эцнээ төмөн хэрэгтэй ийм нэг хотыг эзэлсэн харад дэмжин гэдэг нэртэй халдартай ийм нэг хүн байж гинэ. Энэ бол энийг зүйлд нь энэ дайлдаж бараад хөсгөлдөхгүй ийм нэг сүхэ их баатар байж гинэ. Энийг бол чинээс гарч ирж энийг бол Вар савнаны яраалыг үджээ. Энэ бол хамгийн сүүл усаарны хатаагаад энийг хэдэн төмөн тэрэгмартуулж ирж энэ бол усаарны хатуулж энийг жаахан хүчил юм уудуулсан ийм нэг баатар байж. Ингээд сүүл хотын зүүн биеэр хаглаад оргоо дутаагаа гараад явсан. Ард түмэн бол ард нь тангадаг нь тангаж өлсдөг нь өлсдөг гэсэн эцнээ нэг ард түмнийг ингэж сүйдүүлсэн ийм нэг харж анзан гэдэг хүн байж гинэ. Энэ бол хотоор нь арг эцнээ хүнийг дүүргэж ингэж хотоор нь дүүрэн их чөтгөр босгосон ийм нэг хүн байж гинэ.
The legend didn't end there. One day, Batia's great enemy appeared before the castle wall. It was the ruler of the northern Mongols, Genghis Khan. Batia led his soldiers out towards the mountains to the east. 3 times they fought the enemy, and 3 times the battle remained undecided. So Batia returned to the castle and made ready for a siege. Time after time, the castle walls were attacked, but no impression could be made on them. Batia's soldiers broke up their millstones and made missiles of them to throw at the enemy. Many of the attacking Mongols were in confusion. Then Genghis Khan thought of a plan. "Dam the river which passes the castle," he cried. They brought sand in carts and changed the course of the river to the west. Seeing that his people were dying of thirst, Batia told them to dig a well inside the castle walls. They dug in the west corner of the courtyard to a depth of 240 meters or 800 feet. But they couldn't find a drop of water. Now Batia knew that the end was near. First, he threw all his treasures into the well. Then he killed his wife and all his children with his own hands, so they should not fall into the power of the enemy. Then he and his soldiers sallied forth for their final charge. Still cursing his enemy, Batia now breathed his last. After the castle had fallen, Genghis Khan and his soldiers searched it for the treasure, but all in vain. No one ever saw it again. All they ever found was a big serpent with glittering scales, which people say was a malevolent spirit, the ghost of Bhatia. With the first rays of the morning sun, we rose and went into the castle. We were its first visitors for half a century. It's shaped like an irregular square, 440 meters from east to west and 370 meters from north to south. There are gateways on both the east and the west sides. The interior of the castle was something like a small town. Everywhere you look, you can see traces of buildings, and there are ruins of large temples. It's obvious that the people were devout Buddhists. The castle walls were 9 meters high, or 30 feet, built of rammed earth. If you stand on one of the ramparts, you're buffeted by the strong wind. The stupa is in the northwest corner. More than 18 meters high, or 50 feet, it dominates the castle. It is said to be a perfect example of Tibetan-style architecture. Outside the castle wall, on the eastern side, you can still see traces of a road. Heralded by the tinkling of the camel bells, many caravans must have passed along this road near the castle. When you enter the eastern gate, the first thing you see is a temple. It's easy to imagine how priests and soldiers must have passed back and forth, greeting each other in their Xixian language. Today, there's nothing left but bits of broken tile. The Japanese archaeologist who came with us was very excited. He'd never expected to see so many ancient relics just lying on the ground. Among the rubble, there are many pieces of tile, some rounded roof tiles, others flat for use as flooring. The archaeologists told us that they showed that the ruin was of a Buddhist temple and that the architecture had been influenced by the Chinese. This green glazed piece was obviously part of a finial or ridge end. This tile was in the form of a demon whose job was to guard the temple against evil spirits. The temple, with its pottery tiles and ornamental Chinese-style roof, and with its white-plastered walls, must have sparkled in the sunlight like a jewel. You can see other architectural influences at work as well as Chinese. Tangut, Uyghur, and many other tribesmen must all have lived together here. It seems that the northern part of the castle courtyard was reserved for temples and offices, and the southern part for the houses of the ordinary people. For in the southern half, there's no sign of any tiles or even plaster. The space inside the ruins could have included a marketplace and a courtyard for the caravans of the traders. The ordinary people's houses must have been made of sun-baked brick, with wooden cross beams supporting a clay roof. To everybody's surprise, we even found a fragment of silk. The archaeologist was overjoyed. It's silk, was all he could say. The extreme dryness of the climate accounts for the preservation of the silk for such a long time. It was not exactly in good condition, but the fine weave of the silk enabled the professor to conclude that it had been imported from the interior of China. Wooden combs can often be dated more or less exactly by the shape of their curves. This one was made by the Tangut. This heel-less cotton shoe was beautifully embroidered. Once the Tanguts had established their kingdom, they adopted many Chinese customs, for instance using buttons like this one. Part of a tea jar was found inside the castle, and this interested the Japanese greatly. The archaeologist examined the fragment carefully, as tea jars like this one have also been found in Kyushu in southwestern Japan. It's evidence of the fact that tea must have been an important trade item, and that Harahoto must have traded in tea. Buddhist scriptures have also been found, written in Chinese. Cultures of the East and of the West flourished side by side in Harahoto. We also found many scraps of paper with writing in the Xie script, which has still not been entirely deciphered. Perhaps some of these inscriptions will help the work of deciphering. One of the puzzles of Harahoto is that there was one building outside the castle walls. Judging by its shape, it seems to have been a mosque. But Xixie was a Buddhist country. What was a mosque doing here? Perhaps there were Muslims among the people ruled by the Tangut, and perhaps they regarded the interior of the castle as profane, so they built their mosque outside. Traders from India and still further west would have prayed in the mosque and found relief after the long and arduous journey along the Silk Road. But what made the most powerful impression on us was a discovery we made at the base of the northwestern stupa, a memorial tower about 2 meters high or 6 feet. Erosion caused by the wind had made the walls of the tower cave in, and its floor and the ground outside was scattered with countless tiny memorial images that had been stored inside. They'd been mass-produced in casts. They must have been bought by the Buddhists of Harahoto and offered at the memorial tower in memory of the dead. We took a few of the Buddhas for museums in China, but left the rest exactly as we'd found them. In the afternoons, a strong wind blows every day from the west. The rivulets of drifting sand seem like the gliding motions of the legendary serpent that guards the treasure of Harahoto. The old man, Tamdon, and the other Mongols never once ventured inside the castle walls all the time we were there. Once again, the sand blows against the walls, drawing a veil over the legendary dark castle of Harahoto.